Due to popular demand, I've decided to do a color grading tutorial. I'm going to talk through in depth exactly how I grade my footage in DaVinci Resolve. As a disclaimer, my grading process is constantly changing and improving every time I sit down to grade. But I still think there's a lot people can take from this tutorial, and especially if you're just starting out with DaVinci Resolve and color grading. I shoot all my stuff with the Fujifilm X-T3, which is what I'm filming on now, but this can be used across many different cameras, as you'll find out. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to grade 3 clips that I got the other day just going out and testing my new vintage lenses. So to start with, I'm just going to show you what my settings are. So I'm going to keep it in sort of a 16:9 4K timeline for now. I sometimes change this right at the end depending on what aspect ratio I'm going for. And then the other important one here is the color management. So I leave this as DaVinci YRGB and then change this to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. This is what's sort of recommended for the LUT I use anyway. And then on general options, I tick use S-curve for contrast. So in terms of aspect ratio, without changing the timeline, you can quite easily do this with output blanking. So if you were going for sort of a more widescreen look, you can change that to 2.35. But for this one, I'm gonna go for sort of 4:3, 1.33 look. So yeah, let's start in the color tab. So I have a power grade from previous footage, so I'm just going to apply that. 4 nodes to begin with. So my first node is generally noise reduction. I use spatial noise reduction predominantly. Just sort of untick this link here and change this to 6.8, and I just generally just leave that if it's quite a clean image. If there's a lot of noise that needs work, I would go into temporal noise reduction and then just play around with this here. Maybe set this to 3 and then yeah, whatever suits and does the job really. And that's always the first node I use. And then the second one, this has been a pretty big game changer for me, is the HDR. I think this was new to DaVinci Resolve 17, but basically it gives cameras that don't have raw capabilities the closest you can sort of get to it. Because I shoot on the Fujifilm X-T3, I changed my color space to Rec 2020 and Gamma to Fujifilm F-Log. These are just the ones for my camera. Obviously you have a wide range here. So, you know, Canon, Blackmagic, Sony, sort of all the big ones really that you need. So yeah, leave mine as that. So here I generally use this global one. I don't tend to go into the more specular details. This just helps me balance the image and get it to the sort of right exposure that I want. So as you can see here, just bring that down a bit, and then I'm going to just warm the image up a little bit, just dragging this sort of ever so slightly to the left, and probably a bit more. I might just add some pink to that. Yeah, still looking a little bit blue to me. Still warm it up a little bit more. This is ever so slight, you need to be very careful with these. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's done the job. Maybe bring the exposure down a little bit more. As you can see, I'm using these squares here because it just gives you just more precision when changing it. If you went straight in for this and went a bit crazy, as you can see, it's very sensitive. So yeah, I'd recommend just using these squares here. There's a lot to play with here. I generally keep to this global tab. Sometimes if the highlights are a bit too much for me, I'll play with this light or the highlight section. Just bring that down. This is very like specular. I'll show you here with the light. As you can see, it's just brought down sort of the light, and you can play with this how you want. You know, it really goes into specifics of how you can shape your look. So yeah, very powerful tool. I'd highly recommend using this for just balancing your image and getting it where you want it, like right at the beginning. So going into now the power grade, as you can see, a lot of nodes here. I will break it down. This is a mix of power grades I've used in the past. So it includes a lot of SIRS power grade, Rack Productions power grade, and then I top off with a Juan Malara LUT. So yeah, this is the color space transform. If we go into effects here, you can see similar to what I did with the HDR node. You just input your color space with what your camera filmed on. You want to output it to RE wide gamut and RE log C. This is just what the power grades expect. I think it's just a better log profile to work in. And yeah, you can pretty much transfer any log footage or even any footage really. The second one is the grain. Well, this is actually the first node if you look at here, but I generally like to visualize the color space transform as the first one. If we go into this, so we've got split into 16 and 35mm, and then we have softness, detail, and grain. For softness, you can just use a Gaussian blur. It does a pretty spectacular job just with that. But I use Film Convert Nitrate, which is a paid for plugin, and then I turn it pretty much all off apart from image softness, which just helps soften the image. As you can see, if I turn that off here, it just brings back that digital sharpness. But having it on just gets rid of that. And yeah, just gives it a more genuine film look. And the detail does a similar sort of thing. It's very subtle, just takes a little bit of the mid-tone detail out. And then the last one, of course, on the grain node is the actual grain. And then you can play with this how you like. I find this is pretty good for me, but if I wanted a more exaggerated look, I just increase the strength. As you can see, that just sort of brings up the grain a bit, but generally I keep it quite subtle. But sometimes, you know, depending on the project, you might want to go a bit crazy if you're going for sort of a maybe Super 8 look with a lot of grain and just showing it on and off. Yeah, it really, this is, I think, one of the key nodes to that film look. As you see on, it just looks authentic. And then this one, again, a very key node for me. This is from Rack Productions. Going into it, I don't know the details here really. You probably check his video out for that. But this really just makes the colors pop. So if I turn this off, as you can see, just very dull. The colors aren't vibrant, and just putting this on just gives it the colors that you would see on sort of film stock, I guess. Yeah, this is just very key to my look, I think, this node right here. And then that goes into two halation nodes. To best demonstrate these, if you see this car just on the left here, the first one's very subtle in this. If we look at the second one, it just gives that red tint to the highlights that you see on film footage. And then it goes into sort of a Pro Mist node. This is quite a subtle one. Again, just sort of that effect that a Pro Mist would give you. This is using the glow effect on DaVinci. Then I have a warmth node, which I generally don't use, I don't think. Just warms it up a bit more if you're going for, you know, a warmer look. You can switch that on. So then I have this color node, which just looking into it, I think it's very similar to the subtractive color one. And actually looking at it now, just the difference between on and off, I almost think it looks better off. So I think I might just get rid of that from my power grade. Good little discovery there. Then we have the vignette, which to begin with is quite dramatic. I generally boost this up a bit. This is just sort of the offset brought down with a power window. Boost that up a bit, make it a bit more subtle. Up to about 20. I think that does the job. And then down here we have the dust, which is the film damage plugin. This just gives the white sort of dust you get on old film. And then you have the gate weave node, which just adds that sort of projector shake you get sometimes when you're watching a film. I find this best on still footage, which is generally on a tripod, just because on handheld footage, adding sort of a wobble almost makes the handheld look a bit worse. But that's up to taste. It's a quite effective node, but it does crop in your image about 5%. So yeah, just bear that in mind when using that. We'll turn that off for now. And then you have film breath, which is sort of this flicker it gives the image, which again is like emulating watching a film on a projector. Just selling that vintage look, selling that film look. But yeah, let's leave that off for now. And then over here, we have exposure and white balance, but because I do that in the HDR node, we don't really need that. So I'm going to delete those. And then we have a saturation node, which is just the RGB mixer. Just, you know, makes the colors pop a little bit more. And then we have a fade. I think it's just this curve here. Just kills the contrast a bit, which I kind of like sometimes. But if you're going for a more punchy look, you can just switch that off. Both work fine, I think, but for a more softer look. And then we just have two nodes here, boosting the whites and the blacks. And then here is my own added node. So I use the log wheels here, and I've just warmed up the midtones and the highlights and just cooled off the shadows. It's a very subtle look. You probably won't notice it here, on and off. can kind of see in the shadows there, but it's very subtle. And yeah, and that's about it for the power grade. And then this is obviously topped off by the LUT. This does a lot, this LUT. If you switch that off, you can see there, really just adding everything. I don't really play a lot with these nodes because of my HDR node, because I do a lot in that. But there are exposure balance nodes here, corrections and things like that you can play with. But yeah, again, won't go into too much detail. I'd just recommend buying it. And yeah, that completes sort of the power grade. And then to top it off, I have this sharpen node, which it brings back the details as well as the grain. It really ingrains the grain into the footage, I find. If you turn that off, as you can see, it's quite soft. But just adding that really brings the grain out, and yeah, it keeps the footage looking nice. Sometimes if I was qualifying skin, if the skin wasn't quite right, I would just do a qualifier node just around here. I could demonstrate here with the sky. It's quite easy to pull colors, even though there's like grain applied and things like that. It just takes a bit of work. Just pull this across. Yeah, as you can see, it's not too bad. And then I usually use the blur, use the denoise, and yeah, just pull a pretty good key from that. But yeah, generally don't qualify a lot. I try to keep the image just to its natural state, I guess. But sometimes, just to make it look nicer, you can go into that sort of detail. If we were applying it to other images here that I've got, you can just sort of apply the same grade that we were working on. Yeah, as you can see, this one's a bit too orange and it's sort of made it look more saturated. So if we just go into this HDR node, I think just cooling this off a bit will just help bring that down. There we go. And yeah, and that's that about done, really. So as you see, once you've sort of got a look within the video you've got, it doesn't take a lot to go and apply it to every other image. Obviously depends on where you shot and the differences in location, because this is sort of shot on the same road. These are easy to apply between each other, but this one's a little bit more different. Probably take a little bit more work as a darker image, so I'd probably boost that all the way back up to 0. And then it's quite green, so maybe add a bit pink, maybe warm it up a bit. Just subtle changes here and there. Yeah, I think that's about right. Maybe still a bit green. But yeah, I'm happy with that. Again, it's just so easy to apply once you've got that look sorted. To top this off, we're going to go back into the editing tab, and I have this border, which I might make available at some point. This is a 4x3 border, which just, as you can see, around the edges, just gives a nice film-like border to it. Just tops off that look and really sells it. So yeah, I'd highly recommend checking out Sir's video and Rack's video on their power grades. Mine's a good mashup of the both, and obviously Juan Malara's LUT, which I'd highly recommend. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you got a lot out of that. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video.